Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we have a quick one. We're going to look at the 4 studio albums by Fish era Marillion. Marillion formed in Aylesbury in England in 1979. They gigged extensively before finally securing a record deal with EMI and went on to make 4 records with Fish as their lead singer. He left in 1988 and was replaced by Steve Hogarth. And the band continues to record and tour to this day very successfully, mainly thanks to a very devoted following. I think it's fair to separate the Fish and Steve Hogarth eras because I think they're quite different bands to me, but that's something we may look at in another show at another time. At the time, Fish and Marillion were quite unfairly maligned by certain sections of the public. I think they were sort of lumped in with the old rock dinosaurs. I think with, punk and new wave being sort of so successful in the late 70s, early 80s, that they were seen to sort of be part of the sort of Genesis, Pink Floyd, Yes clique. But I think looking back with the benefit of hindsight, without the sort of barriers of trends and fashions, we can see that Marillion were actually a pretty good band and rightly deserve a place at the top table of prog rock bands. But let's get into it. So 4 albums, and at number 4 I'm going to put their second album from 1984, Fugazi. Fugazi was their first album with their new drummer Ian Mosley, who'd replaced Mick Pointer. And compared to their first album, I think this album is a bit less proggy than their very first album. It sounds a bit more direct. You can hear that particularly on Assassin, the single, and Punch and Judy. There seems to be a slightly more punchy sound. Certainly rhythmically on this record. That might have something to do with Ian Mosley coming in on drums. But for me, really, I think the sort of supporting cast of tracks isn't quite as strong as it is on the other albums. She Chameleon, Incubus, Emerald Isle. I don't think these songs are as good as the singles particularly, but I do love Fugazi, the title track, which is a wonderful song that just builds to a fantastic climax. I remember going to see Marillion many times in the early days and jumping around like an idiot when the end of this song kicked in. At number 3, Script for Justice Tear from 1983. This is their debut album. Now, I mentioned earlier Marillion had been gigging heavily, and actually they did release a single prior to this album called Market Square Heroes, which is to this day regarded as something of a sort of deep cut Marillion classic. And it certainly helped build up the following. So there was a lot of anticipation already when this album came out. It was produced by Nick Tauber, who'd done some work with Toyah. And the title track kind of lays it all out. The Script for Justice Tear tells you all you need to know about Marillion. It is very proggy. It moves through the suites. It has, moves through the different changes. You could almost close your eyes and hear Peter Gabriel singing it. The Genesis influence is very apparent. It's also got the web on here, which is extremely proggy too. And then also there's those signs that Marillion have just other strings to their bow, particularly with melody on Garden Party. The quality of the playing is great, like it always is with Marillion. Steve Rothery on guitar, Mark Kelly on keyboards, and Pete Travaus on bass. And as I mentioned earlier, this is their first album, so Mick Pointer is on drums here. He was eventually replaced by Ian Mosley, but you wouldn't necessarily know why, because the playing on this album, drumming-wise, is pretty good. The other thing that hits you is Fish and his lyrics. Now, Fish has been accused of being something of a sort of sixth form poet, of a lyricist. I think that's a bit unfair. I think he's better than that. I think some of his lyrics are their imagery is great. I think some of them are quite scathing. Some of them can be quite funny. So I don't think calling him a sixth form poet is entirely fair, but I do sort of see what they mean. There's a lot of navel gazing and there's a lot of introversion in what he writes about. At number 2 from 1987, Clutching at Straws. This is their darkest album, certainly from the Fish era. They just had a lot of success with the previous album, Misplaced Childhood, and this album in a way deals with a lot of the issues that came with dealing with that success, and being a rock star on the road, isolation and the excess and the loneliness and the pressures that come with being a successful musician. It's all distilled onto this record to create something a bit more somber than they've done before. It's certainly less proggy, and the songs are a little bit more direct, but they have lovely little progressive movements within each of the songs. It's sort of 11 separate songs this time. Incommunicado is the big single, which you can hear sort of is very much about the music business. But you've got Hotel Hobbies on here, Warm Wet Circles, Sugar Mice. There is a somber vibe, as I mentioned, and clearly Fish is unsettled and unhappy about things, and it's no surprise that he left a year later. Marillion fans love this record. The sequencing is really excellent, and the whole album sounds really beautiful. It's not dissimilar, funnily enough, to some of the issues that Roger Waters did with The Wall with Pink Floyd. But as I was saying earlier, very well regarded now in the Marillion canon, if certainly a lot less proggy than some of their other stuff they've done. But my number one Marillion record from the Fish era is from 1985, and it's Misplaced Childhood. The band went over to Hansa Studios in Berlin to record this album. Some of you may know that's where David Bowie recorded his Berlin trilogy, although he didn't, but we call it the Berlin trilogy because it's become folklore. But he certainly recorded one of those albums in Berlin. This is a concept album loosely based on sort of Fish's childhood and his coming of age. It's kind of autobiographical. It's produced by Chris Kimsey, who'd done a lot of work with the Rolling Stones. And of course, it had two huge hits on it, Kayleigh and Lavender. Now, what I think sets this apart as a record is, yes, it's a prog record and has two continuous sides of music. But what sets it apart to a lot of other prog music is the melodies, the tunes. You know I love a tune, and Marillion had loads of them. You can hear that obviously in Kayleigh and Lavender, which were huge hits, but all over this record there are tunes. I particularly loved Childhood's End and Milo and Blind Curve. Childhood's End is a song that's always meant a lot to me. I think it's a beautiful song, fantastic bass line from Picture of Ours. Funnily enough, I met Fish many years ago and I wanted to go up and thank him for writing Childhood's End, so I did. And he just looked at me and in a gruff Scottish voice replied something unrepeatable that it rhymed with duck and cough. Steve Rothery is on great form on this record, as he always is. He's a wonderful guitar player. And I think the record is it's quite touching. It's quite moving. It is a coming of age record, and it works very, very well like that. The whole album took the band to another level, and I think if I was introducing somebody to the Fish era Marillion for the first time, this is probably the record I suggest they go to. So there you have it. Very quick one today. My 4 Fish era Marillion albums. I know Fish fans are very passionate about this sort of thing, so if you disagree with me, say so, and let's get a discussion going down below in the comments. Please subscribe and get alerts for when I do another rock records review, which will be very soon. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye.
Records with you.